Some people were asking which text am I reading from. As I've mentioned before, there's a few translations of the Bhagavad Gita which I personally consider very authentic and good quality. I personally am reading from a translation which is this one, and it is by the Ramakrishna Math from Chennai from India publication. It's a simple book. You can get it in India for just 40 rupees. It's very easy to get, not expensive. But there's other commentaries, translations made by other yogis that are also very good. The one by Shivananda is good. I remind you again, Swami Shivananda's translation is very good. We've got translations made by other yogis, such as Sri Aurobindo, also a very good translation. And there's a few more. So I hope you can get your hands on one of those good ones, because this is definitely a text worth having in your library and occasionally opening it, reading it, meditating on it, because as I've said before, this is a very, very important text, and it carries with it huge amount of knowledge and wisdom, not to mention spiritual teachings. It's time to continue. Are you excited? I'm excited. It's a great teaching. So, if you remember, last time we left off in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, still, as you can see in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, and I was describing verse 51. And the verse, just to remind you where we left off, the verse was saying, wise men established thus in the unperturbed evenness of mind, that means established in this correct state of mind, this unperturbed, which means it's a little bit like what we call in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, pratyahara, this ability to be within your mind, unperturbed, undisturbed, balance. So a man or woman who are established in thus unperturbed evenness of mind, abandon the fruits of action. Again, we're coming back to this, and you'll see this is a big teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, to really go against what the mind usually naturally tends to do, because the mind usually automatically wants and yearns for the fruits, for the reactions, for the actions giving me something, the kind of concept of what's in it for me when I do this or that. There's always expectations. And here it says that if you can establish yourself in this evenness of the mind, abandoning this natural tendency for the fruits of the action, free themselves, those people who do that, free themselves from entanglement. Entanglement, getting messed up, getting entangled, basically, in the cycle of birth and death. In other words, in the samsaric cycle that I've mentioned last time, and attain the state of freedom from all sorrows. In other words, this is true freedom, as I said. So that was verse 51 in chapter 2. And now we move on to 52. And here the Bhagavad Gita says, when you have overcome the delusions of your understanding, which sprung from self-centered attachment. So I say again, when we are self-centered and we are attached, we have these expectations, right? Then we have delusions that come from that. That's what the Bhagavad Gita says. When you overcome those delusions, it says here, then you attain to a state of indifference. It's more of a detached state towards all the past experiences and the others yet to be had. So you basically attain a state of detachment towards the past experiences and the ones that will be coming, which is perfect, past, future, all taken care of. You're in a state where you are not attached. That's very important. How important this is, we'll discover as we go deeper in the teachings. Here, next verse, he says, when your intellect, fed up with the bewildering scriptural doctrines, because the scriptures have all kinds of information there, doctrines, teachings, philosophies, and at some point they say when your intellect says, I had enough of all that, and the interpretations of those, it settles finally in the steady and unwavering introspection. That is, the mind finally, instead of trying to find the solutions outside, goes internally, inside. Then you will attain to real yoga, says the Bhagavad Gita. And now, continuing to the next verse, Arjuna said, O Kesava, he calls by many names to Krishna, basically, O Krishna, he says, what are the signs of a person who has attained to steady wisdom and deep introspection? So how do we recognize such a person, he is asking. How does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? How does he behave in life generally? He wants to know, how do we identify? And this is a very interesting question that you would kind of maybe not expect Arjuna to ask. I don't know how you think, but some might say a warrior like Arjuna, why does he want to recognize such a person? But there's a value to it, which is actually relevant for you, because many people ask me when I teach, they say, how do we recognize a guru? How do we recognize a person who is enlightened? And here, they actually describe a person who reaches such deep introspection, which is maybe not full enlightenment, but it is already a very advanced spirit, self-realized to a degree at least. So how do we recognize? Good question. And Krishna says, he says, O son of Partai, again, they call each other by these very beautiful names, and he says, basically, O Arjuna, he says, when all the desires of the heart have been abandoned, desires abandoned, and the spirit finds joyous satisfaction in itself, without dependence on any external factors, then is one spoken of as a person of steady wisdom. So again, I'm saying when the spirit find joyous satisfaction, a kind of contentment in itself, not in buying a new car, not in buying new clothes, not in having another chocolate cake or whatever things that we seek happiness with, but when the spirit turns inwardly, and it's because of the mind, looking internally and finding the joyous satisfaction in the spirit itself, that's when things start going into real wisdom. That's real wisdom, it says here. I continue. Whose mind is not agitated in adversity. So the mind is not upset about, adversity. You're my enemy, I'm upset with you, you're upset with me. All that is not anymore an issue. Who is free from desire and who is devoid of attachments, fear, and anger, such a person is called a sage of steady wisdom. Sounds nice, if I'm angry, if I have fear, just abandon it. Well, easier said than done, right? But at least we know that there is a path. The question is, how do we get there? The answers are coming. Let's see. Whoever is without self-centered affection for anything. So again, no desires for anything. Who rejoices not in favorable situations and hates not in unfavorable ones. This is a big thing because, we all yearn. The mind has this tendency, because of the duality of the mind, that we always get attracted and we want more good things to happen to us, favorable situations. If anybody says, can you be, when something good happens, still even and centered? Not easy. Because, of course, when something bad happens, we say, okay, something is not going well, let's try to be balanced. We know we need to, because if we lose our mind or our stress, if we become stressed in that situation, we know things are just going to get worse. But can you imagine, even when something good happens, not to lose yourself, woohoo, but actually get to the point where you are calm, centered, even in favorable situations. The opposites, again, are mentioned here. It's very important. Such a person, he says, such a person's wisdom is firmly set. So it's actually true wisdom not to lose balance either in favorable or unfavorable situations. He continues, when a person can withdraw his, what is this? I have a problem with the writing here. 1 second. Senses. Sorry, it's a bit of a typo here. This book is a bit old. So when a person can withdraw his senses from their objects, like the tortoise, like the turtle, its limbs on all sides, his wisdom is firmly set. This is one of the most classic descriptions. It's mentioned in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This is classic yoga, because in yoga they always make this they describe the way the mind needs to work exactly by comparing it to a turtle. This happens a lot, a tortoise or a turtle. Because you know how a turtle, when it gets scared, it pulls in the hands, the legs, the head, and it hides in its shell protected. And then it's kind of, not, open to these damages, whatever, the predators, whatever is there. In the same way, they say that the mind needs to work, because our mind, this is something people don't realize about the mind, that the mind gets weak and it actually gets into this delusional state, this delusion that we call life, which is not spiritual life, because the mind always runs after the senses, which means I smell something nice, I see something attractive, or maybe something terrible, whatever, I hear this, I sense that, my senses are triggered because of external circumstances. What happens to the mind? The mind runs after it. And when that happens, we lose our spiritual status. And here he says that when a person can withdraw the mind from running after the senses, this is what we call pratyahara in yoga. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, that's exactly what it is. Then the wisdom is firmly set, not getting triggered by the senses keep lighting up. This is extra important in modern times, because in modern times we are even more than ever in the history of mankind always agitated and being stimulated. We are bombarded by stimulations from your Facebook, mobile phone, notifications, work, driving your car, bright signs, all the time. Our mind is external. If we can't withdraw, I'm not saying withdraw in the middle of driving, find a safe spot, when you meditate, whatever, withdraw. If we can't learn to withdraw this way, the mind will always be weak and it will always fall from its true place of wisdom, is what is said here. I continue. From the abstinent soul, since the objects fall away, but not the taste of them. So what it says here, it actually continues. That's why the language is unclear. It continues the previous sentence. Then he says here in the previous sentences, his wisdom is firmly set, the one who, as I said, can withdraw. From the abstinent soul, sense objects fall away, he says. So that soul that can be abstinent or basically able to withdraw, he says, the sense objects fall away. In other words, the senses are not anymore a trigger, but not the taste for them. That means it's not that you withdraw and then you can't taste anymore, hear anymore, and you become this numb, boring person. You can still sense, the senses are there, you get the input, but you're not slave to the input anymore. That's the key. When the supreme truth is realized, even the taste departs. He says, that's the first level. The second level is that, he says, when the supreme truth is realized, in other words, an enlightenment state comes, the taste of enlightenment, if I put it in my words here, supersedes any other attractions. If you were enjoying the food, or if you are attracted to this or attracted to other things, maybe sexuality, maybe whatever is, pulling your mind away. Yes, you've managed to withdraw. That was step number one. But then when you are opening up to the divine experience, that makes that all other attractions, even the taste of them, is gone, because you are now, because it's a little bit like, imagine if you could take the kind of taste, the pleasurable taste of all the greatest foods in the world, and concentrate them into one drop of really marvelous taste, like the taste which is the ultimate taste. Once you taste that kind of concentrated taste of everything which is tasty and beautiful and pleasurable in the world, then what can compare to that? Nothing. And that's what he says. That's why when reaching enlightenment, not only that you need to make the kind of effort of withdrawing, and still the taste is there, but you can control it. You can even surpass the control, because you are tasting the fountain of God, so to speak. And then what can, attract you or delude you anymore? What kind of taste can compare to that? So that's what comes next, he says. Moving on, next sentence he says, therefore, or O son of Kunti, he says, the turbulent senses do violently draw away the mind of even a discerning person who is earnestly striving on the spiritual path. So he returns to describe the problem, that the senses being so turbulent, think of it in modern times, so turbulent, they violently, this is not even a gentle thing, it's a violent, he says, violently draw away the mind of even the most discerning person who is really authentically, earnestly, he says, striving on the spiritual path. So this is a struggle. He keeps going. Having controlled them all the senses, one should become entirely devoted. So again, we're back to stage number one, controlling the senses. He says, one will become entirely devoted, he says, to me. He says to me as Krishna, not as the ego, Krishna, I'm a good guy, you should, be devoted to me. He means me, because Krishna, remember, he's speaking as a fully enlightened man. He is actually an avatar. He is a manifestation of the divine. He is basically like a Messiah. And therefore, when Krishna speaks, God speaks. That's the point. That's what they're trying to say. And when he says, when you're controlling all your senses, then you should become fully devoted to me, he means fully devoted to the divine, to the supreme consciousness. He whose senses are under control, his wisdom is firmly set. So again and again he comes back, we have to learn to control the senses. This is a great power. Even in martial arts, like for example in ninjutsu and some of these very harsh, very intense martial arts, one of the things that they learn, martial artists, is not to be a slave to the senses. A ninja can sit in a tree or, I don't know, somewhere in ambush for days without moving a muscle, because they need to be like, the perfect whatever assassin or whatever they are. Not that this is spiritual, I'm just giving an example. And they can do that. That's also control over the senses, but for the wrong reasons. Being a ninja assassin is not exactly glorious from a spiritual perspective. But he says here, the one who can control that, that's where true wisdom comes from. And that's where things really start going spiritually. So we really need to control this, not for wrong reasons, but for spiritual reasons. So he says, and I repeat, having controlled them all, one should become entirely devoted to me, that is to the supreme consciousness. He whose senses are under control, his wisdom is firmly set. Imagine when you will never get triggered by your senses. You feel them, you get the input, but your computer doesn't have to go off keel. You don't have to lose it and run after the senses. That's true wisdom. That's where wisdom really starts from. This is very important. He continues, in one who dwells longingly on sense objects, so that's the one who cannot control, an inclination towards them is generated. So when we dwell on the senses, like This taste is amazing, or I don't know, this attraction is so wonderful, I'm really dwelling on it, I'm thinking about it, I'm missing my cake, or whatever is attractive for you. When you dwell on it, when you basically get a hankering for this, then what happens is that an inclination towards them is generated. Then it reinforces you and you want them more. That's what happens there. This inclination develops into desire, as I just said. You have desire for more. When something tastes nice, or you enjoy it, or whatever, in one way or another through your senses, you want more of it. That's the nature of the mind. That was a tasty cake. Guess what? I want more. There's always this yearning that is developed, the desire. And desire, this is a critical point. Listen to this. He says, and desire begets anger. In other words, desire creates anger. Many people wonder, why am I angry? Why am I so agitated? Why do I get anger? When can I control my anger? Bhagavad Gita answers, when you control your desire, which comes because of your senses not being under control. Now you know. People say, why do I get angry because of desire? How does desire create anger? Let's continue here, because it doesn't end with that. And I want you to see the whole chain of events, how humanity functions, how the mind errs. In other words, how the mind makes mistakes here. And that's what this is basically the roadmap away from enlightenment that he's describing. How come we go so further away from our true self? I'm going to continue here and then we'll return and analyze it better. But I want to continue here so you see what he means. He says, desire begets anger. In other words, desire creates anger. And he continues, anger generates delusion. When you're angry, you're deluded. That's what he says. And delusion, he says, results in loss of memory. Yes, in loss of memory. It doesn't mean you become, I don't know, an Alzheimer patient or something. But what is important to remember, like your true self or spiritual truths, you start losing. And he says loss of memory brings about the destruction of discriminative intelligence. So when you lose memory, your discriminative abilities, your intelligence that can tell you this is right, this is wrong, discrimination is destroyed. And the loss of discriminative intelligence, he says, spells ruin to a man. So that's how it works. This is where we are really suffering from, because of this chain of events which happens. This is not a one-time thing. It happens continuously, all the time in our lives, all the time, because we all the time are slave to our senses, and therefore desire comes, and therefore anger comes, and therefore all those things are developed as a result of that. And that's where men fall, men, women, this is where we fall as human beings. I'll continue. We'll rehash this. You'll see as we study more, these things will come up more and more. And he says, a man of disciplined mind. So now we're coming to the one who can control. A man of disciplined mind who has his senses under control and who has neither attraction nor aversion, so no attraction or repulsion, for sense objects, attain tranquility. So the point is not to develop just control that you're not attracted to sense objects, but the control also should be over being unattracted or hating the sense objects. Even that should not be developed, because, you know, in some ascetic environments, they tell you, hate the world, like in Vedanta, for example, the world is the enemy. Women, let's say for men, women should be disgusting because you shouldn't have any sexual attraction. So they read the book of Shivananda called Brahmacharya, how he tries to completely make a man totally not have even thoughts of women and sexuality. It's very aggressive. It's like, hate it, leave it. Like food is disgusting. Don't eat too much. It's very bad, or whatever. This is how we cut down the senses in an ascetic environment. But here he says it needs to be the middle path, not to be totally into it and get hankering for those sense desires, but at the same time not to hate them, but just to be balanced. That's what he's trying to say. When you have this state, he says, attaining tranquility comes, though he may be moving amidst objects of the senses. So he says, even if the person is in the middle of very attractive environments where the senses are triggered. Imagine you're walking in the middle of a, I don't know, a marketplace with smells and colors and all kinds of desires are kicking in. Even if you would be in a very, how to say, like a very attractive place where you are tempted, a tempting environment, a man like that who can control still will have tranquility. That's what he's trying to say. You will not get, lost in it. Right. And he continues, on attaining tranquility, all one's sorrows come to an end. So this is how we end pain, suffering. For soon does the intellect of a tranquil person becomes steady. Because then when you are not, imagine the intellect is a little bit like a boat, and the senses are like winds that make the ocean very rattled, like a storm. And your boat is always like this. Your intellect is all over the place. You can't think straight. You can achieve success. When you control the senses, you calm down the wind, and then the ocean is calm. And your intellect, that boat, is moving along very steadily. That's when success comes. This is why this is so important to learn from and to see if you can apply it in your life. Moving on. A man of uncontrolled senses, and please, those of you who are a bit agitated that they keep saying a man and not a woman, this applies for both men and women equally. It's just that this text was written, I don't know how long ago the translation was done, years and years, maybe decades ago, when people were just talking in this way. So please take it in a very, non-gender kind of way. So a man of controlled senses has no spiritual comprehension. What does he mean by that? If a man has uncontrolled senses, there's no spiritual comprehension. Isn't that amazing? Because most of us, unfortunately, are having our senses not under control. And then we wonder, am I a spiritual person or not? It says here, a person of uncontrolled senses, man or woman again, has no spiritual comprehension. It's very hard to have spiritual realizations, understandings of spiritual truths that you cannot just understand intellectually, but existentially imbibe into yourself. You cannot have that if you cannot control the senses. This is very critical. So that person has no capacity for meditation either. Whoa! They just told you that if you can't control your senses, your meditations are not really happening. You sit there, you meditate every day, you think you're making progress, but it's not really happening according to the Bhagavad Gita if you haven't, first controlled the senses. For the unmeditative person, there is no peace. Meditation brings peace, and this is a great, great thing. Many people don't realize, and this is said by many great yogis, from Shivananda to Ramakrishna to Yogananda to many great yogis. They all said, only when you meditate regularly, and to meditate, remember, you need to control the senses. Only when you meditate regularly, then true peace can come in your life. Otherwise, you're at war with yourself, with others. There's always this aggression. So he continues, and where is happiness? He is asking, and where is happiness for one without peace of mind? You really want happiness? People say, I really would like to be happy. How can you be happy if you can't achieve peace of mind? And peace of mind cannot be achieved without meditation. And meditation cannot be achieved without controlling the senses. So this is a great teaching, really. And it's wonderful to see how they take us step by step here. Krishna explains how the mind works and where the pain comes from. You might think it's oversimplified, but it's not. Actually, simplicity is one of the most beautiful ways to reach success. It's not about complicating things. You don't need psychology for 20 years trying to understand the id and the ego and this and that. What you need to understand is the mechanism. How does the mechanism work? And this is stripping down the mechanism to very, very clear basics. Follow that, success is guaranteed, is what Krishna is saying. He continues, the senses are naturally disposed to move towards the objects. This we've said already. Whichever of these senses the mind pursues, remember the mind runs after whichever of the senses, he says here, that sense carries away that mind as a gale does a ship on the high seas. That's exactly what I said as the ship with the ocean, because this is a classic example from yoga, and therefore, again, as you can see, I was just jumping a little bit ahead of it, but you can see this is what he says. Same concept here. Therefore, he says, O mighty Arjuna, he says, he who can completely restrain his senses, completely, not partially, completely, he says, from pursuing their objects, has his wisdom firmly set. It's a bit repetitive, but that's the text. They consider this to be an important concept to repeat, so we repeat it here. He keeps going. He says, what is like night? This is interesting. He says, what is night to all ignorant beings? To the Atman consciousness or the self-controlled sage is being awake. This is an interesting kind of play of words because he shows opposites. So what for every person is like night, in other words, it's something that is not totally clear to them. They are like sleep to it, like divinity. Most people don't think every day, all day about divinity, about God, for example. But he says, for a self-controlled sage is like being awake. That's actually for them, wow. And the sensate life, or the life which is focused on the senses, to which all ignorant beings are awake, in other words, me looking at my phone all day, working, talking to people, chit-chatting, behaving, doing my usual day-to-day things, which is considered to be normal. This is how I am when I'm awake, like a normal wakeful person. You're not walking around sleeping, right? He says that is like night to the illuminated sage. In other words, for the enlightened person, that's actually not at all something that attracts them. It's not something that for them is functional, in other words. It's a little bit like when Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, the great yogi, came to his guru at the time, Bhairavi Brahmani, a tantric guru woman who was a great enlightened yogini, and he was telling her mother, that's how he was talking to her, he was telling her mother, am I crazy? He asked her. He said, why is it that for me, all the things that interest everybody else is totally not interesting? I don't want business, I don't want family, I don't want any of these things. And what interests me, what I'm so yearning for, God, enlightenment, these things, and nobody else cares about around me, it seems, he says, and everybody thinks I'm crazy. He said, tell me honestly, he asked her mother, he says, his guru, his woman guru, he said, tell me truly, am I crazy? If I'm crazy, just let me know so I don't, hurt myself thinking about it all the time. And she answered to him beautifully, he said, my son, blessed is the man or woman with such craziness, she said. You are an awakened spirit. You yearn for what is real. These people are yearning for things which are transitory. I want more money. I want more children. I want a better career. These things don't last forever. Enlightenment frees you from everything forever. Therefore, this is blessed. And this is exactly what Krishna is presenting here. He says, for what the average person is night, for the enlightened person is day. It's wakefulness. What is interesting for the average person, for the enlightened person is kind of not at all important. It's like nighttime for them. I hope this is clear. Continuing, he into whom objects of desire enter, or unsought, and causing, let me just read this here for you, and causing perturbation. This is a bit complicated the way it's presented here. To simplify, the one that the objects of desire enter the mind, the one that these objects just penetrate their mind, even like the ocean that is ever being filled by rivers but still remains steady within its bounds. Just like an ocean, the rivers flow into the ocean and the ocean is still full all the time, such a person attains to peace. So in other words, Let me finish it before I comment. Not he who runs madly after objects of desire. Just to finish the sentence. Let's clarify it. So he whom objects of desire entered, but causing no disruption. That, in other words, what we try to say here, that when you control your senses, it doesn't mean the senses stop existing for you. You still feel or perceive the input, but it doesn't cause ruffling in your mind. That's what he's trying to say. He compares it to an ocean, that even if the rivers flow into the ocean, you don't see the ocean is overflowing and starting to get into trouble. The ocean is full, steady, undisturbed by all the rivers flowing into it. So in the same way, if your mind, even if stuff comes in, input from the senses, it's still steady and undisturbed. This is what he says. Then such a person attains to peace. Not the one who runs madly after objects of desire. Again, he approaches the same subject, gives it another spin. He continues, whoever has abandoned desires and moves about without attachments, this is a really beautiful statement, and the sense of I and mine he leaves behind, he attains to peace. You might say, how the heck can I do that? This is my car, this is my house, this is my food, this is my this is society's base. This is actually capitalism. This is materialism. This belongs to me. This is even my husband or my wife. Even people consider to belong to us. So this I-ness or mine-ness, he considers to be a problem here, he says. Therefore, the one who abandons desire, he says again, and moves with, actually behaves, lives, without this sense of this is mine, this kind of attachments, he attains to peace. You might ask, how can I do that? It is my stuff. Should I just not care that it's my stuff anymore? Obviously, technically, some things belong to you, but it doesn't mean that your mind should get deluded by that. Because eventually, I don't want to, make any one of you surprised here, but nothing belongs to you. Because if it truly belonged to you, it should be yours forever. And yet we know that nothing lasts forever. Can you take your car with you when you die in the future, whenever your death comes? You can't. Can you take your money with you, your wife, your husband? You can't. Because it's actually not ours, because we are actually visitors on this planet. We are temporarily visiting here for 80 years if you're lucky, and then we leave. So how is it belonging to you? If anything, you're renting it, so to speak, for a time, but it doesn't belong to you. So relax about thinking all the time, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. This is actually causing pain. Even after death, according to the art of dying, these desires affect you and cause you pain. What is hell? When you can't have what you want, when you desire, because you never controlled your desires when you were alive, and then you pass away, and the desires are still there. Mine, mine, mine. But you can't have it anymore because you don't even have a physical body. It's a hellish existence. This is why we need to understand how critical it is to really internally have this inner peace. Yes, I enjoy certain things, my computer, my food, my this, my that, but this is not really mine. I know the truth. This is what he says here. And we're coming to the last phrase here, the last sentence in the chapter 2, and he says, this, O son of Partha, it basically means, O Arjuna, is the state of dwelling in Brahman. This is the state of being one with the divine, he says. Having attained it, one is no more deluded. There is no more delusion. There is no more ignorance. By abiding in that state, even by the time of death, see, he mentions death here, one is united with Brahman, with the divine, with God, call it again. Brahman is just a name. It is basically the divine consciousness, is what he is saying. And now we have reached chapter 3. It's called Yoga of Action. And I'm going to stop here so we have an exact point of stopping, as we have completed chapter 2 with its marvelous teachings. And don't worry, in the coming chapters, there will be more technical teachings as well on how to actually obtain these success, this ability, this detachment. More and more of that will come because Krishna is going to be asked soon by Arjuna, how can we obtain these things? How can we achieve this success? And Krishna will give teachings on that. Explanations, technical things will come. So this is great. And now it's time for us to go into some Q&A, some questions and answers from me about the topics so far. So I'm going to just have a quick look here and see on my list. I've got so far just 2 questions. So perhaps some of you were just listening a lot and not having time to write down your questions. So let me just let you know we have another, let's say, 10 minutes or so before the hour is up. So please, if you have any questions about anything we discussed so far with the Bhagavad Gita, or any spiritual questions that I can be of service of giving you answers to, now is the time to ask. So drop them in the box there. You know how to do it. Drop the questions. They will be passed on to me so I can give you answers to the questions. So if I have only these 2 questions, I'll answer them only and we'll conclude. If more questions are coming, now is the time. So I have a question from Amanda saying, is it possible to experience the craving and let it go? Definitely. Actually, this is exactly how it works, that you will experience the craving, the desires, because you are not dead. You still feel them. Actually, even after death, it was mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, desires can still be there and torture you. That's why the point is, definitely we know that they're there, we experience them. There's a difference between experiencing and running after it and being uncontrolled and a slave to these cravings. And there's a difference between that to actually experiencing the input. There is a craving, but I control it. The control by the mind being introspected and not running after those desires is what saves you from this. So yes, there will always be the input. The sensations are there, but it will not overcome you. So saying that, moving on, Terry is asking, so saying my creates attachment that affects growth on the path of enlightenment. It is true. Of course, in the daily interaction with people, we can't avoid, it's part of our language to say, give me my keys or something. And we keep saying my, because it's kind of part of our interaction. It is so ingrained. If we would live at a time like what we call the golden age of mankind, Samkhya Yoga, it is called in Sanskrit, which is an age of spirituality, not in Kali Yuga, the Iron Age that we live today, where people are very much the whole society. Our language is based around this kind of desires and attachment, and the point is that if we would have a different society, an enlightened society, definitely people might not speak in that language anymore. People won't talk all the time as I, mine, this is me, this is you, and all this thing. People will talk in a very different way. A spiritual language is different than a mundane language that we have today. So yes, in the modern world, we do need to use the words my and I, otherwise we won't be able to interact with people. But ultimately, yes, this mindness, that the mind is having this desire hardwired into it, is creating exactly this. And it can affect the path of enlightenment for sure. That's why, yes, letting go of this is a big step, as the Bhagavad Gita explains. Kimberly's asking, can you practice an embodied experience of it while still controlling the mind? Good question, but unfortunately not very clear. What does it mean? Can you practice an embodied experience of it? What is it? Enlightenment? I'm not sure what you meant here. While still controlling the mind. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. Can a person in the body can have a high state of consciousness while still controlling the mind? And the answer is yes. The control of the mind is absolutely a vital necessity in the path to enlightenment. But when the mind is fully controlled, then at some point the mind gets to such a steady state that the mind is not mind anymore. What the yogi says, that the mind changes from mind as we know it into a pure conscious matter, so to speak. It's not really matter, but that's the best I can describe it. And in that pure awareness state, it's not mind anymore, then you definitely can experience that. All right, moving on. Terry's asking, it seems that during my massage sessions, my peace of mind transfers to client. How so? Well, when we're doing massage, I don't know exactly which massage you're doing. I don't recognize the name because I talk to a lot of people. But if you're talking about Tantra massage that we teach, which is definitely one of those massage styles that it can happen, then yes, because in a tantric massage session, we have an exchange which is physical by touching the person and massaging them. There is an etheric or energetical exchange. Prana, life force, is also exchanged because we move energy and so on. But it can also be at the level of the emotions. And if your emotions are very peaceful and you're in a very peaceful state of mind, that exchange will make it that it's as if you are borrowing, to a degree, some peacefulness to the person receiving the massage. So yes, definitely it can be that some of your peace of mind will be transferred to the client, at least temporarily. If the client goes out after the massage and goes back to a very agitated environment or doing agitated things, it won't last forever, obviously. But if the person meditates after that, they can maintain that peace of mind for longer periods of time. Mazen is asking, is not believing also a source of pain and suffering? That depends what you mean, not believing in what. If you're talking about belief generally, as in not being plagued by doubts a lot of the time, then yes, you are correct that doubts is considered to be a mental impurity, having lots of doubts. Being a very doubtful person is actually considered a mental issue, not a mental disease or anything, but as an impurity of the mind, which of course begs the obvious question, what are you talking about? Isn't that exactly the definition of science? Science says first doubt, then verify, and only then you can take something as fact. This is the empirical system. And you're right, because actually spirituality is not an empirical system. It's not a scientific system in the same way that we recognize science. It comes first with a leap of faith, and then we start seeing results. It's a different thing. And that's why, yes, it can lead to suffering, because without belief, we are materialistic, and that leads to a problem, because it's even shown, and there are cases shown where people who are very academic, scientific, doubtful individual, even if you show them a miracle, literally, there have been cases of people seeing a miraculous event, and they will not accept it. They would say, no, 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 no. This is something is misunderstood. We just didn't find the trick there. It doesn't work. I can tell you in a funny way, not that it's a miracle. I'm just giving you an example from my life. I remember when I went a few years back to Denmark, I was invited to do some of this energy work in front of doctors in laboratory situations when they hooked me up to machines. They hooked the people I was massaging, doing energy work with, to all kinds of machines and electrodes and whatever. And I was not even touching the person and doing this energy work that you're familiar with in our Tantra massage. And those people would have either orgasmic experiences or more deep experiences than that. And their machines, the computers showed them that that person is having 50% more parasympathetic activation. And that means, from a scientific perspective, that they are starting to experience healing. And the doctors asked me, wash your hands before so you're not using some creams or God knows some mysterious things. They asked me to have short sleeves so I'm not hiding anything. They were looking at me like hawks that I'm not cheating. Even at some point, the director that did this, because they were doing it for some documentary, the director asked to do it instead of me. So I stepped back, he stepped in, tried to do the same waving of the hands, while the person receiving was blindfolded. They couldn't know who's there. And the machines showed that everything goes down. And then I just put my hand on the shoulder of the director, and suddenly the numbers started getting up. So there was no chance for cheating. And they saw something that they couldn't explain, And at the end, in the documentary, the doctors were sitting there saying there was some trickery there. We can't accept this. There was some tricks. We can't accept this. What can you do when someone is very materialistic, when there is no faith, when the heart is dry? It doesn't help you on your spiritual path. It can actually lead to suffering. So yes, the answer to that is definitely yes, Mazen. And Mazen keep asking here, are some beliefs also a source of pain because they create attachment? Definitely. Actually, most of our pain comes because of wrong brainwashing, wrong beliefs. For example, you believe, or not you, somebody may believe that they are undeserving, and it's a very ingrained belief in them that can cause suffering. Or somebody believes that they are bad people. Actually, it's your belief that determines who you are. And that's why some beliefs can actually cause suffering or create attachment. Let's assume that your belief, for example, is that you are a weak individual and you can't resist temptation. Then obviously it will create attachment because you believe that. If you believe you're a strong person, it will change everything. So I'm sure this is quite obvious, so I won't insist on that too much. Those were the questions I received up to this point, and therefore we have come to the conclusion of our live event, Facebook Live event for today. We've explored more of the Bhagavad Gita. We finished chapter 2. Next time we will start with chapter 3 and we'll learn more very valuable truths, spiritual teachings as they come. So I want to thank you all very much for sharing this time with me. For me personally, the Bhagavad Gita is so precious, so beautiful, so deep, so interesting that I'm really happy to be able to share this with you all and, discuss this with you with questions and so on. Thank you all very much. Have a beautiful time wherever you are, and see you again next time.